A voicemail from a real Banner Health patient.
Kudos to all the staff that treated me that day. They were as quick as possible, as thorough as possible, and they gave me peace of mind.
We're here to help you breathe easier. Banner Health. Exhale.
I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency!
Thanks, losers.
And we are back for another edition of the Fantasy Football Consistency Show here on the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. Thanks again for joining us. This is Bob Lung from Big Guy Fantasy Sports, joined, as always, or at least 90% of the time, by my guy, Ron Rigney. Ron, how's it going, buddy?
Good. I'm a little in kind of turmoil here because I was setting some lineups earlier, and I'm finding myself with Josh Rosen in a couple of places, and I don't know if that's going to work out really well or if that's going to blow up in my face. But I guess if there was ever a week to start Josh Rosen, it's going to be this week at home against the lowly, almost equally as a lowly Washington Redskins. So we'll see how this works out.
Somebody created a very nice, like, picturesque, almost like a concert poster looking thing, and it said Tank Bowl. And it was, Miami Dolphins versus the Redskins, 2 tanks onto the thing. Very well done, because obviously there's the 2 teams that are tanking. We're not exactly sure what they're going to be tanking for. I'm assuming in Miami they're tanking for Tua. Washington, I don't know what they're tanking. They're tanking for everything, I guess, but probably so are the Dolphins. But I'm not sure that they're sold on this Haskins kid from Ohio State that I said not to draft. I told you he'd suck.
I did check earlier on StubHub because it's not that far of a drive. I did consider going because I knew it would not cost that much. And lo and behold, you can get into this game for $21 if you decide to go. Yes.
Yeah. They pay you $21, or you actually have to buy the ticket?
I think that might happen Sunday morning if they don't sell enough. They might give you $20 in free beer if you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
not a bad deal.
No, exactly. Rhett Ellison caught his first pass. I'm very excited. Very happy. Hopefully he gets about 5 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown. Let's go with that. Nothing big. I just want him to do something other than the 0 I got from all the leagues I had Evan Ingram in tonight that I have to sit here and not watch him dominate and been kicking ass all year. So, but I know that I'm not alone in this, as many are. But as always, thanks again, like we said, for being here. We are excited to be here as we are every Thursday. We get this posted by every Thursday night. Again, we're part of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. Also on that network, you hear on most Saturdays, the Consistently Cashing, where Ron and Colby go through the Cash DFS using consistency and making their picks. How'd you guys do last week?
I'm not sure how Colby did. I know I cashed on FanDuel, my DK lineup. However, I think the contest I was in on DK, I might have very well been the last place person in the whole deal. So didn't do so hot there. I don't know what it is about DraftKings, man. I have a hard time with that. But FanDuel, I'm only 1 week I have not cashed on FanDuel.
As I say, you've been
pretty well
very well. Maybe you should just do the FanDuel. Maybe Colby should just do the DraftKings. We have to get Colby on here sometime to find out what his this Saturday. Find out what Colby's DraftKings is, and maybe you do 2 on FanDuel, he does 2 on DraftKings, and you will win even more money.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so that happens on Saturday. Also, Prop It Like It's Hot. Prop It Like It's Hot. Prop It Like It's Hot is our prop bet consistency podcast on Saturday mornings as well. Still doing very well with that on both the Vegas legal gambling, whether it's offshore on your website or in the states you're allowed. Or if you're doing it on Thrive, the Thrive Fantasy app or website, doing very well on that. I won again. I think I won, what did I win this week? $105, $110, something like that on the games. Playing tonight, played mostly under. Because I knew the weather was bad. Did use the tool a little bit just to kind of support some of my picks. Obviously, it took the Giants Giants against a good defense pretty much gave me the unders for most of those anyway, but went with the unders even though it was bad defense on the Giants side. I went with some of the unders or changed them to unders or just didn't bet it at all in the Thrive game because of the bad weather tonight in New England, cold, rainy, windy, 20-mile-an-hour winds. So hopefully that'll turn out well again tonight. So doing well there. So don't forget about those on Sunday. So Ron, we've got through week 5. We've had a couple buys. This week we have 4 teams on buy, so we do have some people that are missing. And so we're, here's this. Now we're going to start that stretch where we really got to start looking at the weeks ahead as much as we're looking at just this week too. Is if we're going to pick up somebody for the waivers, are we picking up just for this week, or can we pick them up for a couple weeks? Because maybe we got a wide receiver off every week for 3 weeks, and we need somebody to fill in so we can grab somebody off the waiver wire that might be worthwhile. Whether that's trying to think of some of the guys that are, D.D. Westbrook, Mike Williams, Cole Beasley, some of the guys that might be sitting out there. Heck, even Darius Slayton playing tonight has been 3 for 5. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the wide receivers. But what are your thoughts so far? I've heard a lot of, comments like weird and different and surprising and, all the stuff that we seem to say every year, but what have you seen that has surprised you just from an overall aspect of the fantasy season so far through, let's say, what are we at, about over a third of the way through?
I got to say probably the one that surprises me the most, and I know we touched on it a little bit last week, but is DeAndre Hopkins. And DeAndre Hopkins, we talked about him last week as well, being our top point getter, top consistent guy 2 years in a row. And, you look at the numbers, and I got a little excited because I wasn't really necessarily looking at my team that I had him on. I just kind of glanced at the score of the game last week with the Texans and the Falcons, and I saw that they put up 52 points. And I'm like, oh, wow, DeAndre Hopkins had to have a huge day. And he had 7 for 88, which isn't bad in a PPR, right. But it's not first round.
Most time you'd be happy with that, but
exactly, it's not first round pick number 7, 8, 9 range, somewhere around there. Numbers in a PPR. So right. He's probably the one that I would say is the most disappointing of any of the guys across the board. But there's quite a few.
Yeah, no, I think, I think the thing that has surprised me the most has been kind of the overall, I'll just say top wide receivers as a whole. If you remember it early, in the preseason, and I was talking about, the draft strategy that I was using. And I kind of was going with the, hey, if I got one of the first 4 picks, I'm going to take one of the first the studs, obviously, whether it was Barkley, Zeke, depending when Zeke had his issues, McCaffrey and Kamara. And then I said, basically after that, I wanted to get 2 stud receivers if I'm drafting late, in the first round. And the studs that I was drafting were guys like Julio Jones, Odell Beckham Jr., those kind of folks. DeAndre Hopkins in the middle of the round, Devontae Adams, Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm trying to think of some of the other guys. Basically the only one that, and one we were kind of, I'll just say kind of down on, was Michael Thomas only having 75% consistency last year. He was kind of the one that we're like, if you want to get him, that's fine. He's obviously one of the few perfects for the year. But the rest of these guys, have all fallen to the wayside. Now, some of them are injuries to their quarterbacks. I get that. Big Ben, Hurst, Schuster going down. But Julio Jones, Baker Mayfield certainly hasn't been playing at what we thought he would. So that's affected our boy Odell Beckham. So that is the thing to me, I think that's surprising. Now, A.J. Green got hurt. Mike Evans, we expected Godwin to take a step up, but we didn't expect Evans to not only take a step down, fall off a cliff at times. And I think that's been a surprise, which is 0 points last week, while Godwin has like 35. Yeah. I have no problem if Godwin and Evans are getting 15, 20 points a week. But why one is getting 35 1 week The other one gets damn close to 0, and then it flip-flops for a week, and then it goes back a week. It's just, it's just been crazy. But nothing is as funny, though, as looking at Will Fuller, who is now 7th for the year in total points and earned his first clutch game and is sitting at 20% consistency for the year. Kids, if that isn't the epitome of inconsistency, I don't know what is. That might be the worst I've ever seen. We've had our talks about like guys like Cam Newton. I think the one year T.Y. Hilton was like 29th and had like 33%. But the fact that he's 7th in total points and 20% in consistency is just dumbfounding. And the funny thing is I posted it on Twitter when I put up my article for the week, and some guy tried to sit there and say, Will Fuller normally has been consistent in the past. And so of course I had to screenshot the 2017 where he was at 36% for the year. Last year in 18, he actually was 5 for 7 until he got hurt.
Yeah.
But, he's never been super consistent. So I said, in 3 weeks, we'll be looking at him being 1-7 and still being 20th in total points. So it's just amazing. So anyway, so let's move on. Let's move to the quarterback position. As you mentioned, Deshaun Watson lit it up mostly with Will Fuller. And a reasonable day for our guy, DeAndre Hopkins, but still good. Matt Ryan right up there, top of the list. Russell Wilson. Some of the big surprises: Teddy Bridgewater, Gardner Minshew. Dak Prescott got back into the roam. Probably the biggest surprise the last couple of weeks is that Patrick Mahomes has barely squeaked by 2 weeks in a row with only 21 fantasy points in a week, but over that 19.5 threshold that we're sitting at so far. And that's the other thing, we talk about the clutch factor, and the clutch factor is basically the points that you need to get into that top 12 every week, and that's on average. But right now, the clutch factor for quarterbacks is literally like 19.5. Last year, it was over 20. I think it was about 20.2. So it's down quite a bit from last year, but most of all the positions are down from last year in their clutch factor. Running backs last year was 11.2. I think it's down to about 10.6. Wide receivers is 10.9, and tight ends is somewhere, believe it or not, tight ends are higher than last year. I think it's like 9.1, and last year tight ends were 8.2. And it's surprising because tight ends are up, but the consistency of tight ends is not. It's about the same. It's pretty much nothing. But the total points that they've been scoring on a weekly basis overall has put the average up there pretty high for now. It'll probably drop down a little bit, and we'll see, a few that fall through. But, like we said, some of the surprises, there's only 2 perfects, Mahomes and Matt Ryan. I continue to see Matt Ryan staying there, and probably Mahomes too, just because one, their defenses both they have to throw that much to stay in the games. The rest of them at 80%. A lot of guys: Prescott, Brady, Kyler Murray has been a surprise. Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, Josh Allen, Andy Dalton. I think that's the surprise that a lot of people don't realize is that Josh Allen and Andy Dalton have a higher consistency rating right now than Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, James Winston, Aaron Rodgers, and Baker Mayfield. And some of them by a lot. Mayfield and Rodgers are at 20% for the year. But let's talk about the good players first before we get down there. What do you see, that upper echelon of 80% or higher? I mean, I know there's definitely the surprises, but of these guys, do you see some of these continue? Do you see some of these dropping off quite a bit as reality strikes? Or is most of these guys on teams, I look at most of these teams and I see guys who are playing on a bad defense with teams with bad defense. Mm-hmm. And, from that standpoint, you have to believe they have to keep throwing the ball, and Andy Dalton's the perfect scenario for that.
I think that when you look at the top, of course, you've touched on Mahomes, and I think Mahomes is still going to be there just because he's been so good, and he's dropped a little bit. He's kind of showed that he's somewhat human. I guess. And he's still got a ton of weapons, so I think he's going to be right there. Ryan, like you said, because of the defense, is going to be right there. As I go down the list, the one guy that I might see sliding out of here, I might see, even though he's been solid this year, Dak Prescott might slide a little bit. I just don't know if he's really that guy that's going to be continuously solid for them, for the Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
You move down a little bit more, it wouldn't surprise me to see Kyler Murray maybe hit a little bit of a rookie wall. But then again, he's kind of right there with Lamar Jackson as far as I think he can be close to that threshold just because of what he can do with his legs, but also the amount of plays that they're going to run on offense. But to go down the list a little bit more, Andy Dalton, yeah, they have a bad defense, but he's probably the one that's the most shocking to me. You know, he is 80% consistent, but he also is 16th in total points.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably the biggest surprise of anybody that I've seen on here. But yet again, they're going to have to air it out. But then again, you think about it, it is still Andy Dalton too.
Right, exactly, and I think that's, but again, playing in some of the defenses they're playing, they have to throw the ball to stay in these games because they're not doing anything. Their offensive line is bad, which is surprising that Dalton. But when you throw that much per game, it's certainly going to open things up. So,
and you do have to give him credit too for being able to do it without AJ Green and essentially just Tyler Boyd in the passing game, and that's pretty much it.
Right,
gotta give him a little credit.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So let's look at the bad boys down at the bottom here. Like I said, Aaron Rodgers 20%, 19th in total points. Baker Mayfield 20%, 25th in total points. I think we talked about this a little bit last week, and really nothing much changed. It really just comes down to the fact that, is that Rodgers' issue is not Aaron Rodgers or a problem with Aaron Rodgers. The issue comes from the standpoint of they have a good running game and they have a good defense, and they don't need to throw the ball 35, 40 times a game, to win NFL, games for them so far this year. Baker Mayfield's the opposite. He needs to throw the ball more. He's not doing it. He's not throwing the ball well, and it's just been an ugly, ugly situation. If you're a Mayfield owner, do you see changes in that, or what do you think is going to happen?
I mean, you would think it has to, but at the same time, I mean, here we are again with all these high hopes for the Browns, and this is the year. This one's different. And it's
right,
not
exactly,
different.
Right.
And we've kind of talked about this, on off air throughout the week. Is what's the deal here? I mean, they're talented on offense. Their defense should be a little better, and it kind of comes down to play calling. So I don't know if it's play calling holding him back. I don't know if it's his own attitude holding him back. I hear that a lot of the veterans are not happy with the way that he carries himself in the locker room, especially with the scenario they're in as a team. You see, he's 20% consistent. He's 25th in fantasy points, and I know a lot of people took him before a lot of these other guys at the top, including myself in a few places. And it's really, I've cut him loose in a couple spots that are more shallow spots, and he's riding my bench in a couple of other leagues. I benched him in favor of Dak Prescott this week. So I would think that with the weapons they have, they would turn it around. I read a thing where they're listening to offers already for OBJ trades. I think that's just a lot of smoke, but who knows? It's not good in Cleveland right now, and I think a lot of it, if not all of it, starts with Baker Mayfield and the high hopes that were put on him in his second season.
Well, if you went out there and picked up Brandon Bolden, good for you, because he just scored a touchdown.
Of course he did.
Of course he did. Because why would we give the ball to Sony Michel? That doesn't make any sense.
No, not a bit.
Not at all. All right, so speaking, and what a great transition that is, right into the running back scenario. We've talked about running backs for the last few weeks. We've talked about the fact that most of the stars are up there consistency-wise, total points-wise. Most of the studs are above 70% or higher. There are a few that are just below. Barkley's at 67%, but that's because he got hurt and won that game and hasn't played since. But he'll be back there. I'm not too worried about that. Even if you went over 60%, you've picked up most of them. There isn't too many, I'll call, good RB2 or guys or higher that really are struggling from a consistency standpoint. If we had to pick some, we've got a few. Joe Mixon, Sony Michel at 40%. Tevin Coleman. Well, Tevin Coleman really shouldn't have counted. Devontae Freeman. But, yeah, so once we get above that, Devontae Freeman's at 60%. Marlon Mack's at 60%. Chris Carson's at 60%. Josh Jacobs. Mark Ingram all at 60%. 75%. Le'Veon Bell. Kerryon Johnson. 80% or higher, basically all the other studs. Gurley, Johnson, Kamara, Chubb, Jones, McCaffrey, Henry, Elliott, Fournette, Cook. All the guys that were drafted probably in the first 3 rounds are up there. And then there's some others up there too. So we got Austin Eckler, James White. What else was I going to say? Is probably the 2 ones that we weren't expecting because of, Eckler maybe just because we knew he'd fill in for Gordon when he was out. But with Gordon out, with Gordon in this past week, Eckler, well, he caught just a mere 15 catches in a PPR format. That doesn't hurt. So that kept him at number 2 in total points, but still 100% consistent. Consistency-wise, 100%. Eckler, Cook, Fournette, Elliott, Derrick Henry, James White, 4 for 4. The others are all 5 for 5. Obviously, James White, just kind of pick it up where you left off last year. When Burkhead's out, not playing as much, it's Sony Michel and White, and by the way, we'll give the ball to Brandon Bolden at the goal line because that's what we do. But James White, missed 1 game due to injury, but 26 in total points, not setting the world on fire, but he's scoring that nice 12, 13, 14 points a week in a PPR, and that's what you get, and that's a great flex player if you've got him. I doubt if he's on your waiver wire, but maybe if he's out there sitting deep on somebody's bench, maybe make an offer for him. I don't think it's going to slow down. Burkhead always seems to be hurt. Doesn't seem to be helping much. We know the guys that are perfect. I mean, I think our surprise is still really Fournette at the most. I mean, outside of White, obviously. He's, again, we said this last week, he's been very quiet. He's been very, very productive, very efficient, 7th in total points. Like you said, I just keep waiting for something to happen. But here's the thing. Jacksonville's doing well. If Fournette was playing well and the team was losing, I could see more of a blow-up. But they're winning. Gardner Minshew is doing a good job of, keeping them in check when they need to throw the ball. He does a good job of throwing it. So they're doing a decent job. They're not a fantastic team. The defense is okay. It's not anywhere where it was a couple years ago. I'm not sure it ever will be. But your thoughts on the perfect folks and how they keep going?
Well, I think it's kind of the usual suspects. I wouldn't be obviously shocked to see Austin Eckler. He's not going to have 15 grabs every game, I don't think, as long as Mike Williams is in there, as long as Keenan Allen's there. It was a weird week for them last week as well for the Chargers offense. Didn't get much out of anybody really other than Austin Eckler if you had him into PPR. I don't think any of them really changed other than maybe him. It might be James White as well, because I think James White, you look at him, his 4 for 4 doesn't necessarily shock me because he's right there just over that cusp that we've seen every week. He's 26 in total points, so he's not getting you a ton of points overall, but he's getting to that consistent level. And I had kind of an interesting conversation earlier. In our NastyCast Slack channel, we have a football channel as well in our Slack channel, we talk to our Patreon people, and we got a football NastyCast Patreon channel as well. So we throw some stuff around in there, and had one of our listeners, our guy Ben from Canada, got offered Leonard Fournette for DeAndre Hopkins straight up, and he was about to hit the click button to take it, but somebody else swooped in at the last minute and traded the other owner, Julio Jones, for Leonard Fournette. And he asked me what I thought about it. In any other year, I probably wouldn't have been on board with it, but he really needed some running back help, and it really didn't sound that bad considering what Fournette has done with his total points and consistency as far as with DeAndre Hopkins' total points and consistency. So that kind of tells you where Leonard Fournette has kind of come from and how DeAndre Hopkins isn't viewed as favorably so far this season.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I've seen some ridiculous trades this week, either on Twitter, just people posting them, or people asking me questions about, should I trade this guy for that guy? And I'm just stunned. And I think my favorite was a guy that, what was it? He was offered Mike Evans and a running back. I want to say Ingram? I think it was Mike Evans and Ingram for Will Fuller and trying to think who the running back was. It wasn't like it was somebody. I think it might have been like a James White or something, or It was just, if you'd have done it 2 weeks ago, you would have laughed at it. But, you're just sitting there. Oh, no, I know what it was. He was offered Mike Evans. Who did I say the running back was?
I already forgot.
I think it was Mike Evans and Ingram. Mike Evans and Ingram for Fuller straight up. Yeah. And I was
if I'm the Fuller owner, I hop on that all day long.
Yeah. And then another trade I saw, somebody offered a guy, Mike Evans, to him for Chark. And I literally said, I don't know if I can do that at this point. Because Chark and Gardner Minshew are just on fire together. And I'm like, he's the main guy. He's. So I told him, I said, I don't think I'd do that at this point. I know that sounds terrible, but I'm like, I just don't, I said, maybe if I said, it sounds too good to be true. Like you think you just like, oh, that's an automatic. You just do it. It's Mike Evans. Yeah. But Chark has been on fire, and we'll talk about his crazy numbers he's got right here at wide receiver. But let's finish off the running backs at the lower level. Anybody down there you think will pick it up, or you think has a slow start? Maybe one of the guys that I think is going to start picking it up and has been picking it up has been Jordan Howard, which I loved in preseason. Mm-hmm. He's really been coming on as a Philadelphia main back. I mean, Miles Sanders has been mixed in, but Howard has proven that he is a good back, which we knew all along. Now, this week they play Minnesota in Minnesota. That's going to be a tougher road to hoe, but I really like Howard going forward. I have him in a lot of leagues. I'm sure I'll be using him when my starters or my studs, starting running backs, I think I have him in flex in most leagues if possible, but it'll be a good fill-in for bye weeks, but he's the guy I'm leaning towards. What about you? Tevin Coleman certainly showed something on Monday night that he looks like he's back. That could also be another nice pickup / guy that you might want to trade for before he gets too hot.
Guy that I see kind of down further that's not really one of the more household names on this list that has kind of slipped up is Ronald Jones in Tampa. And I think it's a case of, I don't think necessarily he's going to take the world by storm, but I think he's slowly kind of getting a stranglehold on that running back job there in Tampa over Peyton Barber. And his carries have kind of been up and down, but he has had 3 out of 5 weeks where he's gotten at least 13 carries. He had 19 against the Rams in that wild 95-point total game that they put up that nobody saw coming. And he only had 9 last week. I think GameFlow kind of predicted that a little bit. They were kind of in a shootout there with the Saints. So I think he's a guy that you'll see not put up I don't think he'll be a ton of total points. I think he might be kind of one of those James White scenarios that I think he's going to do enough. But I think he was cheap enough in a lot of drafts if you ended up hanging on to him or he's on waivers. If he's on waivers, now's the time to go get him. But he was very, very cheap in drafts. He's probably been sitting on your bench most weeks, maybe a bye week fill-in. But I think you start to see him put up a little bit more consistent numbers. And I think he moves up a little bit from that 40% consistency as he gets more carries as the year goes on. Agree,
yeah. And, if anybody can do something with him, it's going to be Arian. So we'll see what can make, if he can make at least maybe not a David Johnson, but at least a 80% David Johnson, maybe. We'll see. All right, so let's move to the wide receiver. And like I said before, this is what I said at the beginning. This is the situation right now, which I think is just a complete mess. Some of the guys in here, I'm happy because they were guys that you and I were definitely all in, like Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, Tyler Boyd, Larry Fitzgerald, those kind of guys. But there's a lot of guys in here, that we not necessarily I would say, I don't think anybody in here we would say we were down on, except Mari Cooper. But I think, as you said and I said, the biggest surprise is that where the studs are, and they're down in that below 70%. Which, is really what the big surprise is. As I mentioned before, there's only 4 100% perfect wide receivers so far. Only 2 of them played in all 5 games, Michael Thomas and Cooper Kupp. They're second and third in total points. Thomas we expected to be probably top 10. Cooper Kupp we expected to be consistent, but certainly not at this kind of numbers. Oh, look, there goes another defensive touchdown for no. Yes, I think he made it in. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's a defensive touchdown for the Giants.
Whoa.
Oh, looky here. We got a 14-14 football game. What do you know? So, like I said, those two guys up there. The other two guys, Tyrell Williams, perfect 4 for 4, but he missed a game a week or so ago. Michael Gallup is 3 for 3, missed a couple games as well, but he came back strong last week. That is, I don't even have to ask you if that's a surprise. If any of these guys, it's just more of a "are you kidding me" kind of thing when it comes to who's up there. But 80%, there's a lot of wide receivers in there, various guys, various levels, all the way from number 1 points guy right now, Chris Godwin, to down to Mohamed Sanu, who's 80%, which is a guy that, I know I had in the guide is, don't sleep on this guy. He's not that bad. If you need a wide receiver 4 or 5, grab him. He's a decent fill-in when you need him for bye weeks. But to be 80% consistent at this point's pretty impressive, especially when you realize that Julio Jones is not. He's at 60, and so is Calvin Ridley at 60. So definitely not a good thing at all. What are your thoughts on that, guys, in that 80% range? I mean, we talked about a few of them already, DJ Chark and folks. Any other surprises that are still there after week 5 that you're like, I would not have guessed that this guy was kind of hanging in that 80% range at this point?
Well, before I do that, let me real quick. I want listeners to think about, when I name these guys off, I want you to think about where you got them in your league if you have them. I'm going to go through our top 10 consistent guys, and I just want you to kind of take this in for a second. So I'm going to start at number 1 and work my way down. Michael Thomas,
right.
Cooper Kupp,
right.
Tyrell Williams, Michael Gallup, Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett, Courtland Sutton, Tyler Boyd. Think about where you got those guys. Right. Think about maybe a couple of them you might have even got on waivers. I know DJ Chark, I drafted super, super late in one deep league, added him off waivers after maybe 1 or 2 weeks. But these guys are winning you leagues right now because these are your wide receiver 2s and 3s that you got at that level, and you're pairing them with those guys that may be struggling a little bit, and it's working out for you. As far as the most surprising guys, I'd have to say when I look at the list, the Courtland Suttons of the world, obviously DJ Chark, he's a guy that I liked early on in the season. I don't know if I thought he would be 5th in total points and have the rapport with Uncle Rico like he does, but he does. It's also kind of interesting to see 2 Cowboys receivers there. I don't know if we were going to even think that one would be up there in the 100% range, but we've got 2 in the top 10 there with Amari Cooper at 80% and Michael Gallup. And it's starting to look more and more as Michael Gallup has gotten healthy. He's starting to kind of look like the real deal. It's kind of scary there in Dallas what they might be able to do. I know I settled down on Dak a little bit, but if he does stay at the top there, he's got a couple of solid weapons on the outside to throw to.
Yeah, no question about it. The key is I think teams are going to look at is what did the Packers do to the Cowboys that stopped that in its tracks, because Gallup wasn't playing that week, right? I think he just played this past week. Or no, he did play in that game, but they were so far behind. I think he made it up in kind of garbage time. But, they shut down that offense, and especially shut down Dak Prescott. So that is something that, you kind of worry about when you see a team get shut down that hard, and whether or not other teams are going to take notice and do the same thing, especially the better defensive teams.
Well, I was going to say, and to be fair, they played Miami, the Giants, and the Redskins at 3 of the first few weeks. So you got to take that in consideration as well.
Absolutely. And like you said, heck, you could, well, there may be a couple guys you couldn't have. You could have had all of those guys on your team. I mean, because you could have got Michael Thomas in, let's say, the late first, early second. Kupp would have probably been their 3rd or 4th. Cooper in the 3rd or 4th. Williams, Gallup, Chark would have been way late rounds. And Lockett and Boyd would have been rounds maybe 6, 7 as your wide receiver 3, and Sutton would have been late. So not that you have that deep of a bench, but if you were in like a best ball league, you could have had all those guys. I mean, it's not unreasonable. As we go down further in the list, as we talked about, I think John Brown's the one I think still surprises me that he's still there and at 80%, 19th in total points. I mean, Buffalo doesn't seem to have that much of an offense, but they seem to be doing something. At least those two seem to be doing something. So, that's impressive. The other guys in there, Kenny Galladay, Alshon Jeffrey, 75%, T.Y. Hilton, 75%, but is already starting with his injuries. McLaren there as well. But I think, as we're getting not close to the end, but we want to drag it out too far. I think it's the guys in the 60% right now that are probably the more surprising, which is Keenan Allen, Julio Jones, Julian Edelman, DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Brandon Cooks, Josh Gordon. Those guys aren't normally 60%. Is now will all these guys stay 60%? No, I'm sure they'll pick it back up. They'll get back into that 70-80% range, and all will be well. But a lot of those guys we all have on our team somewhere, and it's kind of scary that they're not performing at the level that we'd expected them to perform at. So, any thoughts on those guys and? Some that you think will pick it up and some you think might stay down there because things aren't going well for them.
Well, if you've got those guys, hopefully you drafted some of those guys in our top 10 late, and they're compensating for the Odell Beckhams and Landry's of the world.
Right, and that's what's happened on most of my teams.
Yeah, which is a good thing. Keeps you afloat. I'm hoping, this is part of me having a couple shares of him. I don't think we're going to see DeAndre Hopkins at 60%. I think he's going to move it up a little bit. It's hard for me to believe that he's going to have 2 years as solid as he's had in our consistency rankings as well as total points. And then Keenan Allen as well, 6th in total points, but all the way down here at 60%. I think he's another guy that you're going to see come up. And I got to pick on those Cleveland receivers again. I mean, they're right there at 30 and 32 in total points. They're right there at 60%. And if the quarterback's not picking it up, it's going to be hard for them to pick it up. So I'm not too optimistic on them just yet. Another guy, Brandon Cooks, I think you're going to see him get a little bump as well. I think he's going to get a little bit better.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to the tight end spot as we wrap this up for Week 5. Evan Ingram, first in total points. He won't stay there probably. He'll stay at 100% consistency because, he's not playing tonight. But Travis Kelce, perfect. Zach Ertz, perfect. I think there's no surprise here, especially on the 2. I was a big Ingram guy. Hopefully he can get back to health. Hopefully this was kind of a 1 week. I heard the fantasy footballers say on their podcast on the way home tonight that they said, Evan Ingram didn't seem to be that bad last week, and we didn't think that we thought for sure he'd play this week, but I think he saw a short week in New England, cold, wet weather. Yeah, this knee hurts pretty bad. I'm going to take a week off. For the longevity of the rest of the season, I'm okay with that. We don't know how well he would have done tonight anyway, especially in this weather. But I'd rather him take a week off and play the next 11 games or 10 games of this season than to go out and make it even worse. Especially when he's got a slightly tore MCL that can get ugly real fast. As we move down to the 80% spot, Austin Hooper, Andrew Jones, where the hell is it? Mark Andrews, Will Dissly, and Darren Waller. Hooper, second in total points. He's literally 0.5 behind Ingram. He has more total points this year than Travis Kelce and Zach Ertz and George Kittle. They talked about Dirk Cutter being in that offense. Dirk Cutter has always, was in Tampa Bay before, used O.J. Howard extensively, comes here. Now they're using Austin Hooper extensively. Good connection there. Another scenario that I heard was, the offensive line isn't doing very well, so that's why they're not throwing the ball as much to Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley deep, so they're going to Hooper short. So I haven't seen the game, so to really watch and make a decision on that, what are your thoughts that you think is happening, or is it a combination of both?
Got to be a combination of both. And you mentioned Dirk Cutter. Dirk Cutter with O.J. Howard, but he also made Cameron Brate a pretty viable option some weeks as well. I know, and consistently cashing. Cameron Brate was my guy a couple weeks as far as being, having just he was kind of what you were talking about earlier, getting from Rhett Ellison that 5 for 50 with the score, and you got it for next to nothing as far as spending money on it. So I think it's a combination. Kind of like we said with Matt Ryan too. That defense is going to be bad. They're going to be continuing to throw the ball if Julio Jones isn't in there. he's got to get the ball somewhere. We mentioned Sanu, we mentioned Hooper as well. Those guys are going to reap the benefits.
You're right on. But as I mentioned earlier, the whole tight end situation is a mess. So we got 3 perfects. We've got 4 80%, so that's 7. We have George Kittle at 75% because he had a bye week, 3 for 4. After that, it just plummets. The only guy at 60% is the fine lad James O'Shaughnessy, who is hurt and I don't think is supposed to play now for at least a while. I don't know if it's the rest of the year, but for at least a while. And then you hit the 60%, or no, then you get 50%, which is T.J. Hawkinson, and he's the only one. After that, everybody else is 40% or below. So Greg Olsen, Delaney Walker, Jimmy Graham, Ebron, Jack Doyle, Eifert, O.J. Howard. I mean, all of these guys are way off the charts, consistency-wise. It's we talked about the streaming of tight ends this year, and hopefully, you're doing that. But it's hard when Delaney Walkers and Jimmy Grahams and Ebrons and the guys that we put in there just aren't, the offenses aren't getting it done. If you're lucky like me, or not lucky, good, and a little bit lucky, and I think you probably did as well, I drafted Ingram in a lot of leagues. Got lucky, I made good choices there. But he's hurt, had to fill in. But the league that most of the time I was either drafting Ingram or I was drafting Jared Cook, which was a disaster. Luckily, in week 2, this young man named Will Dissly came on board on my waiver wire and everybody else's waiver wire. And after that first disaster of Cook either getting 0 or 1 catch in week 1, and I said, well, I got to find somebody, and I picked up Dissly. And he now is, 4 for 5 and 80% consistent and has looked great. So, at this point, you really got to like what those guys have done. Darren Waller has been a great fill-in. Mark Andrews, many people may have drafted late. But, those guys are saving most fantasy teams if you didn't do, Kelsey, Ertz, and Kittle. If you did Kelsey, Ertz, and Kittle, you're probably in good shape, and you're probably doing very well with your teams because you then went out and drafted other guys like we were talking before, Cooper Kupp, Michael Gallup, Godwin, Chark, and those kind of guys at wide receiver, and you have the stud tight end, so you're in good shape. So any thoughts on tight ends other than ugh?
Well, the Will Disleys and Mark Andrews of the world are helping also compensate for those wide receivers that are down in the dregs around the 30s as far as our consistency. I mean, when you scroll down the list here, one of the things that baffles me the most is probably the Colts tight ends, just for the simple fact that without Andrew Luck, without T.Y. Hilton's been banged up a little bit. You would think that the Eric Ebrons and Jack Doyles of the world would be getting a little bit more love, but they really have not. And the Colts have still looked pretty solid on offense, so it's a little bit of a head scratcher there. Other than that, I mean, yeah, it drops off huge after the first few. But I will say the one that surprises me, because I have him in a non-PPR, I do have him in a couple PPRs as well. I've said the guy I probably the most shares of in yearly is Zach Ertz. I'm kind of shocked that he has been as consistent as he has been, because it seems like, and maybe this is just me, the rest of my team letting me down, and I want him to score more points, but I wouldn't have thought he would have been 100% consistent at this point. So that was probably the most surprising one for me to see. Yeah,
I mean, the fact that he's 7th in total points doesn't make us feel good about that, because you drafted him as at worst your number 2 tight end, as the number 2 tight end overall in your league. So to be 7th, it's good that he's 100% consistent, but 7th in total points is not what you're expecting from him at all. So yeah, definitely a little bit of a letdown. But I think that offense, to be honest with you, I think they need Deshaun Jackson back as quickly as I need Deshaun Jackson back, but that'll help that offense because they can spread the field a little bit more and get Ertz a little more open underneath. So, all right, we got about 45 seconds. Why don't you hit everybody up with where you're at this point, what you've been doing?
All right, consistently cashing. Check us out. Article and podcast will be visible Saturday morning. Colby Conway and myself get back on the winning track here. Fantrax Dynasty Baseball over at Fantrax HQ. I took the week off, but the boys, and along with Eric Cross, previewed the Red Sox system last week, which kind of sucks.
It kind of sucks.
Yeah.
All right, that's cool. As always, you can find me at Bob_Lung on Twitter, and of course, Big Guy Fantasy Sports every week with the Consistency Week in Review. And as our boy said, we always do the Prop It Like It's Hot every Saturday morning for your prop bets. Everybody have a great week. God bless. Take care.
Are you hungry for the usual today? Or are you ready to spice things up with the new Nashville Hot Brisket from Firehouse Subs? We're kicking up our slow-smoked beef brisket with Nashville Hot Seasoning. It's topped with melted pepper jack and our sweet and tangy slaw, served piping hot on a toasted cornbread roll. Yeah, a cornbread roll. Save time. Order your new Nashville Hot Brisket on the Firehouse Subs app today. Firehouse Subs. Enjoy more subs. Save more lives. Participating locations, limited time only.
And now, a thought from Geico Motorcycle.
It took 15 minutes to take a spirit animal quiz online.
Please be the cheetah. Please be the cheetah.
And learn your animal isn't the cheetah, but the far less appealing blobfish.
Oh, come on.
To add insult to injury, you could have used those 15 blobfish minutes to switch your motorcycle insurance to Geico.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on motorcycle insurance.